Hello and welcome back to Nyris Gaming. This is not going to be the typical content I put on here, but I have been deep diving into all of the Koumei mixed opinions and kind of wanted to share my own. Personally, I feel she is great concept-wise currently. She's just in need of some tweaks here and there, because in her current state she is at best unreliable, and that's just not the most fun to play, which is sad because there's fun mechanics here, I feel. I enjoy playing her, but there's a lot about her that doesn't feel good. Most of the complaints I see about her are mainly quality of life in that regard, or that she is the same as other frames but bad. And I can see where this is coming from, so let's get into my adjustments here, shall we? Some durable enemies going here so they don't die quickly. Level 200 corrupted heavy gunners with steel path modifiers on, but they are paused. My main proposed changes would be keeping her whole status applicator identity going. I personally feel that they missed this opportunity with her theme, because as far as I can tell, her whole theme is the Dice Maiden, the Marionette, not just fate related, but a manipulator of fate, and it kind of just feels like instead of going with the theme of making the odds better in your favor, they kind of just went with gambling sucks most of the time, and it feels good a little bit of the time. Instead of the chaotic side of random chance, they went with the real-life casino gambling side of chance. So a lot of her abilities feel underwhelming or bad most of the time, and then feel amazing some of the time. Which, as far as my calculations came out, I fired this off 100 times, 10 times in a row, and it averaged about 11.8% chance of rolling triple sixes, which is what makes your abilities better. Like this one. This one will throw out a projectile, doing fate threads, which apply a random status per thread once per enemy. Only problem with this is one status of any of them really is going to do basically nothing. And oftentimes, the enemies don't like to walk through these, unless you're in a very tight corridor or something like this. Especially if you roll triple sixes, then it's one of every status, which is awesome. Let's see if we can hit that on enemies. There we go. This also can be good if you spam it, but you have to spam it to accumulate those statuses if you want it to do anything, because the enemies aren't going to accumulate them on them. They'll walk through maybe 3 or 4 at most, and if they're not these triple sixes ones, then it feels kind of like you threw an ability out, forgot about it, and so did the enemies. Also, there's frequently times where it ends up too high for them to walk through, so they don't walk through any of them. Basically, this feels awful. Unless it's a very, very tight choke point on lower level enemies. Especially considering your 4 applies statuses based on the number you roll. Like so. Gets to the point where you're kind of wondering, why are you ever doing this? I saw a lot of people subsume this off in favor of something like Sickening Pulse, which can make the 4 a lot better and semi-consistently kill enemies, but still heavily unreliable. Also don't feel that a Warframe's ultimate should have to rely on a Helminth ability to function well. Personally, I feel the 4 is good where it is for the most part. Heavy crowd control, very long duration, lots of status effects, especially when tied in with other parts of her kit, like maybe a few ones and her passive, and maybe some green shards you can actually strip armor pretty effectively. Coming back to the 1, my proposed change for this can apply the 4 base statuses and all of the combined ones. I would say relegate this purely to the 4 base ones. Her 4 can do every status of the normal damage types, the IPS and the elements, all of them. So it will cover all of that, and this will distinguish it from the 1 more. But instead of the 1 doing all of these, have it relegated to the first 4 base elements, and instead of it being 1 per enemy, have it be 1 thread per enemy. It'll find a nearby enemy, latch onto them, and over the span of 5-ish seconds, pump them with 10 stacks of that 1 status. Cold will freeze them, Toxin will do a decent bit of damage, Heat will crowd control them and damage them decently and remove some armor, and Electricity will be good against Corpus mostly. That way it's not massively overtuned, but it at least does something more effective. Especially considering if you do the Toxin one, that'll open the door for late game players to add green shards and corrosive strip with Archon continuity. It will also, given Koumei is marketed as a beginner frame, give them an idea of what that many stacks of a status can do to enemies, more visually. That's another thing that's a bit weird with her. She's marketed as a beginner-friendly frame, easy to farm, only takes 24 hours to build, and yet she's also marketed as an endurance frame because of her 2 wither decrees. She's just all over the place as far as marketing, design, concept, theme. We will get back to that too in a second, but I need to talk about the passive first, so I need to get that on her primary. Her passive gives a buff to one of her 3 weapons, secondary, primary, melee, for a full minute, and causes it to do random status effects, which as you can see here, this is just a Fullman Prime with a base beginner mod set, which does not appear to be working on her passive, even though it's on her primary currently. 1 second. There we go. That was bugged out. So there's a bug for you, DE, who's only doing these statuses that I had on there. But see, if you look in the bottom right there with the primary icon there, her passive is giving random status effects to my primary, which as you can see, massively overloading this enemy with statuses. I personally think her passive is in a good place right now. I want to integrate it more into her kit than it is currently because, especially in all the videos I was watching, it is overlooked heavily. No one seems to remember it is even there most of the time. But especially on high fire rate weapons, seems to be even more statuses than her 4 usually. And pretty dang consistently, although of course not consistently in the specific ones you want, but we want to keep that chaotic nature as far as random chance is concerned, because that's the whole theme we're going for here. Speaking of which, for 2, Omikuji will give you a decree after you complete a challenge. The main problem with these, there are a ton of really good decrees, including the one that makes status damage doubled. They do not have the one that spreads statuses to nearby enemies when you inflict them on an enemy, which is silly. I see they don't want her to be massively overpowered, but they put stuff like crits do double damage and statuses do double damage, so why the heck not? The main problem people have with this is the fact that there are a ton that are really useless, like finishers give you 500 armor for 10 seconds, because you're totally going to be doing that frequently, instead of trying to just wipe out enemies as fast as possible. Most of the time, people are not sitting there looking for an opportunity to do mercy kills. They just killed the target. So oftentimes, you go through all the effort of stopping your gameplay to do wall latch kills or sliding kills, all to get something that is not very effective for what you're building, or even sometimes messes up your builds by adding an element onto something that ruins your whole setup, like with melee influence. There's also the problem that you don't get a choice as to what the decree is that you get. You were just given one and you have to deal with it. There's also the factor of the cooldown after you get the challenge completed, ramping up massively all the way to 2.5 minutes. We already have a roguelike in the game with Duviri. Not only are you given choices in that, up to 4 for decrees, but you're given a stat bonus of 10% damage and 25 health every single decree you get. Koumei gets nothing. If you get a bad decree, that you just got a bad decree. That is all. And as far as roguelikes are concerned, there's a mechanic that isn't in Duviri, that is in several Vampire Survivors-esque games, eliminations. So I propose instead of giving 3 rerolls like you have in Duviri, you are allowed 3 eliminations. Once you complete a challenge, the decree pops up. Then you can press the 2 to either accept the decree or hold it to reject the decree up to 3 times. That decree will then be eliminated from the pool, and it will not come up again. This will allow you to fine-tune at least to a tiny bit and manipulate fate. I also propose, as far as challenges are concerned, to keep the difficulty and the tempting fate theme going. Keep the negatives. Sometimes a decree will pop up if you roll low. It will give you a permanent status debuff like Toxin. I would propose potentially getting rid of the energy drain one because that is heavily annoying. However, I would also propose changes to the challenges themselves because wall latching and sliding, especially in environments where you don't potentially have a bunch to wall latch onto effectively, not to mention the fact that Warframe's a very fast game, so if you're stopping to do this, you are immensely more likely to be shot and killed. Plus, it's just annoying to full stop in the middle of doing a bunch of this. Very counterintuitive to Warframe's gameplay in general these days. My proposed changes as replacements, talking about that thing integrating the passive in, get a certain number of kills with a currently buffed weapon. I don't entirely understand why this isn't a thing already. This will encourage players to use their other weapons more. They don't have to stop the normal gameplay to do something completely out of character for themselves and the game. Gets them using, say, their melee or their secondary if they're only using their primary. Plus the weapon is buffed, so it's a bit easier, because you're unloading a bunch of status effects. And if you want to add a bit more challenge to it, to, again, keep to the tempting fate idea here, have a negative where you have to get those kills before the buff runs out. In order to alleviate some of the annoyance with the cooldown getting so high, I would propose that if you roll a triple sixes, you take 5 seconds off of that cooldown. You lucked out. Here's an added benefit. There is one more proposed changes to getting a decree that I would like to implement to Koumei's current state, but I will get into that later once we've covered all the abilities. In that regard will be Omamori. The main problem with this one, especially that I've noticed, is that it's entirely unreliable. Koumei puts out these charms, and they have a 50-50 chance to do anything. 50% of the time, they will do nothing when you receive an instance of damage, and 50% of the time, they will block it and heal you. It's a little bit weird because if they do block it, there's nothing to heal. Also, severely confused as to why, in their minds when they were designing this, why instead of healing does this not either apply another status effect or refresh the status effects on the target. It's very off-theme with everything else. So that's change proposal number 1, add status into the mechanics of this. People also find it heavily unreliable because it's basically just Revenant Mesmer Skin, but bad. Because Revenant Mesmer Skin is guaranteed to block things, and it also stuns the attacker, whereas Koumei's is not retaliatory at all. It also got Gara's defensive ability, and Baruch's defensive ability. I get that we're wanting to go chaotic and random chance, but having the random chance be either it blocks an attack or it does literally nothing just doesn't feel good. Having the negative be so bad that it's basically worthless or a waste of time is not the direction I think this should have been taken at all. The main reason why nothing feels good most of the time. So yeah, one more change once we're done with all abilities, plus the added effect of either adding another status effect or refreshing the statuses on the attacker to sync it up with the rest of her abilities, either instead of or on top of the healing. My first thought is, it's supposed to be a defensive ability and make me feel safe. I do not feel safe at all when I have this up. I still feel like I have to be avoiding everything at all costs because I can still be shot somewhat reliably. The only way that this 50-50 makes it worthwhile is if you hit that 11.8% chance and get a triple six, you are invulnerable for the duration. Therefore, you want the charms to last as long as possible. The only problem is that makes the base version of it garbage. Back to the 4. Like I said before, good amount of statuses, not very reliable statuses for specific enemy types, but very long crowd control, and this allows you to do whatever the heck you want to the enemies for the duration, basically. Good priming for. The main problem with this one, why? If you cannot see the enemies, it does not hit them at all. Given Sickening Pulse does it as well, she is useless in this regard unless you're in big wide open areas like this. It does have very good range scaling, but it can't hit through walls. You have to have line of sight. Unlike, Saren, Volt, Mag. Mag being one of the 3 starter frames, so we can't say that's a beginner-friendly thing. Main change I would make to this ability is just get rid of the line of sight requirement. This isn't going to nuke enemies almost ever, even if you have Sickening Pulse. It's just going to crowd control them heavily, which is nice for aiming. And if you could do it through walls, it's a good spotting ability to know where enemies are so you can actually get into the action. Maybe get your decrees done faster. If you don't have a good source of enemy radar early on, especially. I don't actually remember how easy that is to get early on. So now that we have gone through all of the base proposed changes for the abilities, I say all this like DE is going to look at this and actually change anything. I'm kind of just brainstorming. I totally didn't stay up massively too late one night, and then my brain was overactive until 4:30 in the morning thinking up ideas. Why am I like this? So, last proposed change, to alleviate more of the fact that the decrees can sometimes be a complete waste of time after waiting upwards of 2.5 minutes to get them, doing an annoying challenge, permanent stats for the mission. My initial thought was giving an extra 10% to each of the Warframe ability stats, range, power strength, efficiency. But then I swapped it over to be more Koumei specific. Could also add some Koumei specific decrees in there. But these stats, nothing to the 2, because we're already getting a 5-second cooldown reduction when we roll triple sixes, making that feel even better, and making us ramp up our kit and abilities better. But whenever you get a decree, you get 2% status duration or damage, I haven't fully decided on that, to the 1, making this more reliable as time goes on. The more effort you put into tempting fate and completing challenges, the more you get to manipulate it and be better. Sorry, 5% damage or duration, up to a total of 50. These will all stack 10 times. For the 3, up the block chance of the non-666 version, potentially 2% stacking up to 20, making it a 70-30, so it is at least more likely to block than not. Still not wholly reliable, you can still not luck out and take hits, but it's a bit more consistent because you put in the effort. And the 4, the number of statuses is based on the number you roll. I would propose that with the decrees, once you complete one of the things you could get is a +1 status minimum to the 4. So at max stacks, you will be doing at least 10 plus, that would be 35 statuses. All in all, once you've finished 30 challenges, doing a long endurance run, not only will you have a bunch of decrees, potentially getting them a bit faster with your 666, getting a few eliminated that you don't want, you will have 50% status duration on the 1 of the 1 thread at a time, latching onto a single enemy and pumping them with 10 status effects. Have that last a bit longer. The 3 will be more consistent with an extra 20% block chance on the base one. Keep it at the 50-50 for the invincible one so it doesn't feel worse. And then the ultimate will have an extra 10 minimum status effects. So that'd be another 27 right there. I feel this would not push her too much into the territory of being massively overpowered. She still doesn't have any heavy nuking capabilities. Her 4 would prime better, even though we have a ton of primers in the game, including the Epitaph. She will get more powerful, a little bit faster, and she will feel less sucky to play when you're not looking out. I feel this could make her feel immensely better to play. Overall, I still don't really feel it's on theme 100% for her. I was just going purely based on the theme they went with, because when I look at something like a Manipulator of Fate and Dice Roller, my first thought is not overload them with status effects. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. When I started reading and finding out she did status effects heavily, I had no way of knowing that's what was coming, because that doesn't line up with my image of a Fate manipulator at all. So I have ideas for a complete theme overhaul setup for her as well, including an augment for her 1, but I will save that for another video if it's even wanted. That's going to be far more intensive than this was. As if this is going to make any difference at all either, but whatever. I wanted to, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, so frick it. That's going to do it for this weird random Warframe kit revamp that I overthought one night. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Like the video if you liked it, and if you would like to see the complete revamp, that will obviously not happen because she just came out. And I shall see y'all in the next one.